Good evening, and thank you for tuning in. I am here tonight with Senator Eric Brakey.
Hi, everyone.
We are coming to you live from Auburn, as I usually am, often am these days, but obviously not in my backyard, instead in a studio. Appropriate for the topic we're discussing tonight. We're going to be talking about a lot of issues related to the referendum questions. But we're going to start out, that is scheduled to start at 7. We're going to start out with just a little pre-show, a conversation, talking about current events and what we had going on this past session.
Yeah, we only got a few minutes before 7 o'clock, but
short pre-show.
Figure it's an opportunity, folks. Find the video, join in, and for the real conversation we're going to be having on these issues at 7 o'clock. So, Laurel, I guess what are we going to talk about? How was your first real
in-person session?
In-person session. I mean, your first term in the legislature was the strangest
bizarre.
legislature anyone could have imagined in the COVID era.
It was. If you guys remember my first session, we were at the Civic Center when and if we were in session at all. And so, yes, this is my first session in the State House, really. Before we discuss that too much, guys, make sure to post your questions in the comments now during the pre-show and when we're talking about the referendum questions. And our producer, Dave, will pipe up if there's any questions that we should go ahead and answer.
And now would actually be a good time, too, to click the share button.
Absolutely.
Share this video on your news feed and in your groups of people, with people who might be interested in the conversation we're having tonight on some of the referendum questions that are going to be on the ballot this November. Now's a good time to click that share button so that others that you know.
Button.
Well, liking is good too.
Too.
Liking is good too. Like and share,
yes.
Because we would like to have as many folks involved in this conversation tonight as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in answer to your question, Eric, it was an interesting session for sure. I wouldn't say that anything was dramatically different from the first session, as far as the toxicity of Augusta. But certainly the mechanics were different as we were in the State House. And the best part of that was that Maine people could be present and in their people's house. I would say that's the major difference between my first session and this session is the presence of Maine people. And I'm really, really thankful that they were able to participate more in their government than they were my first session.
Yeah, by the thousands people showed up for some of these hearings.
Absolutely.
I'll say, I don't know how any of you would have done it. Thankfully I wasn't in the Senate. Right. That was my hiatus from the Senate during the COVID era. I don't know how you could do it with kind of over Zoom meetings and all of that. It's kind of like the illusion of having a real legislative process without having one. I mean, how do you collaborate? How do you work through issues? It just seems like when you're just staring at people on a computer screen, there's no real dialogue happening there. There's no real collaboration happening there. There's no mutual problem solving. It's just kind of my team, their team, and we're just doing what we're told from leadership. Of course, we, not you and me. That's not how we roll.
Well, I would say we had at least the illusion of working together this session. And there were a few bills that, I don't know if we want to call this segment the almost segment, but we had some bills that actually almost got passed, you and I, this past session. Eric, why don't you tell us about one of yours?
I mean, I actually had a few bills that did pass. So
real legit. Yes, very nice.
You voted to kill one of them.
Well, even liberty-minded individuals can have a difference of opinion on some bills, right?
On occasion. But no, I was, I really worked really hard, and I know you were really supportive on the taxation committee of my bill to eliminate the sales tax on gold and silver.
Yeah, why should Maine people have to pay a tax to buy money?
Yeah, we're less than 5 states that still have this tax, and in times of high inflation, this is what people have available to them to be able to save the value of their savings and their paychecks. So that's not just eroding as the Federal Reserve prints trillions of dollars out of thin air. And I appreciate several Democrats came on board. We had majorities in the House and the Senate. And then I guess the Democrat leadership realized one got past the goalie and they whipped votes over the weekend, came back, revoted, and killed it dead.
Same thing happened with my bill. I had a healthcare price transparency bill. Who likes surprise bills from the hospital when you have no way of finding out? If you go to Walmart to buy bananas, you know how much those bananas are going to cost. It would be nice to have hospitals actually following the rules they're supposed to be following that are out there at the federal level, following them at the state level. And my bill would have said, hospitals need to follow the rules that are out there that they're required to follow and list their prices. So if you go in for a routine procedure, you'd be able to know how much that would cost. And it almost passed, just like your gold and silver bill.
Well, right. It did pass,
It did
right?
pass.
And then like this exact same situation,
Yeah.
it came back for a second vote and people changed their mind. Someone must have spoken to them.
I know.
I wonder.
Hey, guys, this is a Libby bill. Kill it.
Yeah. You do wonder, is it, oh, we don't want this legislator who we don't like very much getting credit? Or is it the hospital lobby who's like trying to stop that from happening? But it is interesting to see when you get a strong positive vote on something and then the second vote comes along and it's
it passes House,
changed?
passes Senate, and bounces. What did change?
Yeah.
To make it a bad bill. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we are out of time for this portion of the evening, and we're going to be moving into what we're actually here for.
The actual show, not the pre-show.
Not the pre-show. So here's the thing, guys. I'm Laurel Libby, State Representative Laurel Libby. I represent House District 90 on the other side of Auburn from where I'm sitting right now and all of Minot. And I have with me here tonight Eric Brakey, Senator Eric Brakey, who can introduce himself further.
Well, you already did the first part of it, but I'll do it again. So I'm Eric Brakey, State Senator for all of Auburn, New Gloucester, Poland, and Durham. And happy to be here this evening to talk with Representative Libby and all of you at home or wherever you are, about some of these items that are coming up on the referendum for referendum this November. Because I'll be honest, there's a lot more questions than you usually see.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Eric. Appreciate you being here. So, guys, while we are talking tonight, please do, of course, as we reiterated earlier, like and share this video so that more people can participate, learn what's going on with these referendum questions, and be prepared when they go to vote in the ballot box. And also, throw your questions in the comments. As time allows, we would like to answer your questions. And so you might hear our producer, Dave, pipe up from the background to throw us some questions if we have time for those. And we do have a lot to cover. There's a lot of information. We do have notes because there's a lot we're going to be covering. But we are trying to keep it to 30 minutes. So we'll see how we do. We're going to cover 5 referendum questions tonight and are looking to diving right in. I do want to say a quick thank you to Maine Policy for their excellent voter guide, which really has a lot of great information in it, as well as the resource, the Maine Citizens Guide to the Referendum Election. It's published by the Secretary of State's office, and I'll put links to both of those in the comments when we finish tonight so that folks can use those as a reference. But let's kick right into it. Eric, I assume you've been hearing from constituents asking questions about the referendums and what they're all about.
And especially now that early voting just started, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people are already voting on these questions. So
Yep.
the worst thing to do is show up, not realize there are 8 referendum questions, and you have to vote and guess. So good to do your research ahead of time. Certainly people have been asking questions, and hopefully we can answer some of them tonight.
Absolutely. Better to bone up in advance than be sitting there Googling in the voting booth, right?
Yeah.
So, one question that I ask myself, Eric, both when we're voting on the floor or when I'm in the polling booth voting on a constitutional amendment would be, is there a clear and compelling benefit to Maine people? Is there a really good reason that we would actually amend the Constitution? That's a really weighty thing that we're doing here. And I want to put that out in the forefront because it's a big deal to amend the Maine Constitution.
Right. The Constitution, it's the supreme law of the land. In the case of our state constitution, it's the supreme law of our land. It's higher than any statutory law the legislature may pass or any normal law we might pass at referendum. This supersedes all of that. So yeah, we do want to tread lightly when we're talking about the Constitution. I will say, I remember from this legislative session, there were a lot of different proposals for constitutional amendments, and these were a small minority that managed to get through that process. Frankly, there were some like review. Well, there were some bigger ones I would have loved to see us delve into. So.
Well, and that is a high bar to first get through the legislature and then be put on the ballot, and that has to get a 2/3 vote. of
Right.
the legislature in the House and the Senate.
So necessarily every constitutional amendment that is on the ballot this November has already passed with 2/3 in the House and the Senate, which means Democrats have majorities in the legislature, but they don't have supermajorities. So these were necessarily, to get to this point, there was bipartisan support for them.
Well, I'll just start with my kind of standard where I'm coming from, and my usual answer is, whether it's a bill, a constitutional amendment, whatever it might be, I'm starting from an answer of no.
It's a good place to start.
It's a good place to start, right? If you're starting, whether it's a constitutional amendment or a bill, if you're starting with no, then you're starting with keeping government smaller, keeping regulations minimal, etc. And so that's where I started from on all of these.
Yeah.
And
it's like our legal system. You're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
Well, with bills and changes to the law that should be unnecessary until proven necessary.
Absolutely. And that's where I start here with the referendum questions. And so we'll dive right into question number 5. And in case folks aren't familiar with these, I think we'll probably just take turns reading these. I'll read question number 5 and then we'll discuss it. So question number 5 asks, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to change the time period for judicial review of the validity of written petitions from within 100 days from the date of filing to within 100 business days from the date of filing of a written petition in the office of the Secretary of State, with an exception for petitions filed within 30 calendar days before or after a general election? Whew, Eric, that's a mouthful to read. It's going to be a mouthful for people to read in the booth. Do you want to tackle explaining what that means in common language?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it would help to understand why this has come forward in the first place. I know that the Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, was working this very hard in the legislature, trying to get this change through. And I know she talked about, there was a Democrat legislator who I think it might have been one of the other referendums that are on the ballot right now. Maybe it's the Our Power Initiative or something.
Perhaps.
It was basically the petitions were dropped off in the middle of the season when they were doing other election work. Maybe I don't remember what it was exactly. Maybe they were handling recounts, or there were just other election business that the Secretary of State's office was really focused on. And then all of a sudden they had to deal with all these petitions on top of that. So they're asking for just basically the ability to focus their human resources on election items during that window of when elections, when they're needed for that, and to not have to be counting referendum petitions during that period of time.
So changing it from 100 days to 100 business days gives the office essentially an extra 40 days or so when you take care of weekends and holidays and all that. That's the estimate that the Secretary of State's office has made, is it gives them an extra 40 days. So, and that is in reference to, of course, a citizen's initiative or a people's veto, where folks have gathered the necessary signatures to get an item on the ballot and have turned those signatures into the Secretary of State's office. And then the Secretary of State has to review those signatures, make sure that they're all valid. And so that's the 100 days for that process. So, what are your initial thoughts on that, Eric? It's not necessarily anything that's inherently good or inherently bad.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being totally honest, I don't think this one is we're amending the Constitution. We should always tread carefully, but I don't think this is a really big one way or the other. I will say I know on the committee that heard this is our colleague, Representative David Boyer of Poland. And I know that he was pretty adamant against this, that he felt that it was unnecessary and that the current standards should be sufficient. I'm leaning towards voting no on it, but I can't say that it's something that I'm very... I don't see it as
you don't have a super strong stance.
Yeah, I don't think this is kind of one of those things where you got to like plant your, this is a hill to die on or anything.
This is it. Yeah, I have to agree with Representative Boyer. If I'm looking at the two sides of this coin, we've got one, which is that the government is asking for more time to review the signatures and validate. And the other side, though, is the people that have gathered the signatures and are waiting to hear about their referendum item if it's going to be on the ballot. They've put in the time and expense to do this pretty huge process, and they're waiting to hear the results. And an extra 40 days, given the timeline of when it might be on the ballot and all that, that seems too onerous for Maine people to me. So I come down on the side of no on this one for that reason. Is I've got to prioritize Maine people over frankly the Secretary of State's office and the human resources needs there. So I'm a no. But I'm not, like you said, I'm not a hill to die on no on this one. I think if folks have questions about it, please do pop them in the comments. We want to make sure that each of these items is, explained thoroughly and you guys understand what is going on when you go into the ballot box. Dave, do we have any questions at this point? Okay. All right.
Want to move on to the next one?
I think we'll move on to the next one. You want to read question 6?
Sure. This will be question 6 on the ballot.
All right.
It will read, do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to require that all the provisions of the Constitution be included in the official printed copies of the Constitution prepared by the Secretary of State? Would you like to speak to that, Representative Libby?
Sure. So just in case we need it, we do have a copy of the Maine Constitution.
Of course, the parts of the Constitution that we're talking about in this
are not in here.
Aren't printed in there because that's what we're dealing with.
Exactly. So let's back up and explain that a little bit. So in 1820, we had the Maine Constitution was approved. Maine became the 23rd state. And then the information that we're talking about here goes fast forwards to 1876 when Article 10, Section 7 was added. So we've got that here in the Maine Constitution. And what Section 7 does is it actually removes Sections 1, 2, and 5 of Article 10. Not to be printed, still in force, but not to be printed. And so Section 5 specifically talks about separation from Massachusetts, and there's language around the Indian Treaty obligations. So that's what is removed, as well as in Sections 1 and 2, those sections talk about the first meeting of the legislature that's happened, and so Sections 1, 2, and 5 have not been printed since 1876 when Article 10, Section 7 was passed and became part of our Constitution.
Yeah, and the real impetus for this, as it was legislation and now it's a referendum item on the ballot, it came from dialogue with a lot of the native tribes here in Maine who have long wanted the parts of the Constitution that discuss the treaty obligations with the native tribes to be printed. Ultimately, I voted for it in the legislature. It seems to me that it's a small thing, a sign of respect as we are trying to work through some of the larger questions. And there's a lot going on in the legislature and debates around tribal sovereignty and tribal rights. And this seemed like a small way to pay a little respect from what I saw. But I will also say that I'm also interested in other parts of the Constitution that aren't printed, because there are some very interesting things about our relationship with Massachusetts and things that were, when we had first become a state and there was an open question about whether this whole Maine statehood thing was going to stick.
Yeah, you said there was maybe a portion that allowed Massachusetts to kind of recall Maine. Is that
I don't have the language in front of me. Actually, I had a neighbor a few years back, right in Auburn, who came to me and said, "Do you know about the It sounded like a conspiracy theory when he came to me. He said, "Do you know about the secret part of the Maine Constitution that says that Massachusetts can reclaim land here in Maine if it's like." I didn't believe him. I was like, this doesn't sound like it's real.
And now you're like, yeah, that's Article 10, Section 5.
Yeah, maybe that should be printed. And maybe we need like a constitutional amendment on that. Like, it's been 200 years. Maybe we need to repeal this part that says that Massachusetts has some claim over us.
Maybe.
I mean, maybe we can throw back Portland to them. But the rest we're keeping.
Just part, right? Yeah, so... and I can appreciate that, Eric. I think you and I voted differently on the floor on this. And I see that. I understand some folks see that as kind of an erasing of history. Now, the removal of that was back in 1876. And the kind of flip side of that coin is that the rights and responsibilities of both the Wabanaki nations and the state are not contained in Section 5, because we have the 1980 Settlement Act, and that's what both the Wabanaki nations and the state now abide by. So, as with Sections 1 and 2, Section 5 is reprinting that is not going to change how Maine operates. It's not going to change anything with how we currently function, including those sections in the printed Maine Constitution. So it's not like there's going to be any change to how we proceed here in Maine because of it.
Right. I think that's a very important point, is that printing in future printings of the Maine Constitution, having these parts included doesn't change anything. I mean, it doesn't change the law one way or the other.
Right.
So if we pass this, nothing changes except when you get a new edition of the Maine Constitution, it'll be a few pages longer.
Right. Depending on particularly how long that Massachusetts section is, I guess. So, I am a no on this one. Again, it's not a hill I'm going to die on. But I don't see a clear and compelling benefit to Maine people that is worth amending the Constitution.
And I'm a yes on it. I mean, particularly as I've been working with the tribes on the Judiciary Committee. I think it's just, again, it doesn't have a huge impact, but it's an olive branch and a show of respect in my mind, as we try to continue working in good faith with the tribal nations in Maine to have an equitable arrangement for everyone.
Awesome. So we're going to move on to question number 7. Let's see here. Do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to remove a provision requiring a circulator of a citizen's initiative or people's veto petition to be a resident of Maine and a registered voter in Maine, requirements that have been ruled unconstitutional in federal court? Eric, I think we've both participated in one way or another, a referendum question, a people's
signature
veto,
gathering
signature
and all that.
gathering process, and that's what this question is speaking to. So do you want to explain that a little bit, how that process works?
Yeah, well, certainly. So currently under Maine law, and this was passed in an attempt to try to reduce the influence of outside money and outside influences on our referendum process, because of course Maine has a reputation of being a bit of a cheap date when it comes to these things. People from outside the state, they see how small
state,
small population. We have a easy referendum process, and you take all kinds of ideas, whether it's ranked choice voting or what have you, and they say, here's a great laboratory to try this out. Let's run it in Maine, pass it in Maine, and then we can ship it out across the country. And I think a lot of people justifiably very frustrated by that. I certainly have been very frustrated by that. And so what they passed was a law that says that the circulator of the petition must be a Maine resident.
So if you run into somebody and they're gathering signatures in the Walmart parking lot or your local dump or the fair, they are required to be a Maine resident. That being said, there are some workarounds with that law. But this amendment would clarify and say that they do not have to be a citizen of Maine and that they do not have to be a registered voter in Maine. And the reason for that is back in 2022, there was a court decision that said that Maine's citizen requirement placed an undue burden on core political speech. So this is in part a kind of response to that, to the ruling that law is unconstitutional.
It is a response to that, and I think it's also worth noting, and I would say, and I think you were starting to reference this, that from what I've seen, the law as it stands right now, regardless of the constitutionality of it, which I guess we had a court decision on that, the law I don't think has really worked the way that people hoped it would work. Here's what I see happening on signature gathering campaigns for these referendum questions is now, instead of hiring one person to get signatures, they hire two people to get signatures. One person who is an out-of-state person who is skilled at persuading people to sign the petition, and a second person who's just a Maine person happens to be standing there who is
They
officially
witness
who's officially the pertinent person witnessing it in the official circulator.
Right.
But so
it throws more money into the process.
yeah, so it hasn't really been effective. It's gunked up the process a little bit. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. But ultimately, the law hasn't achieved what it set out to achieve. So,
and that could really be said for so many laws that get passed, Eric. I just have to point out
That's true.
laws commonly don't accomplish what they set out to do.
You know
and
what
this
they
is
say
another
about
one.
the road to hell and what it's paved with.
Good intentions.
Yep. There's plenty of that. So, I don't know about you. For me,
Yeah.
I'll be voting yes on this one.
Yeah.
That's where I am.
I will be as well. You know, I think the getting in alignment with the Constitution is important on this one. Whether people enjoy having money flooding into our state and fueling the referendum process or not, the process is what it is, and getting in alignment with the Constitution is important. So I'll be voting yes as well on that.
All right. Question 8.
Question 8, all you, Eric.
Okay. Question 8. Do you favor amending the Constitution of Maine to remove a provision prohibiting a person under guardianship for reasons of mental illness from voting for governors, senators, and representatives, which the United States District Court for the District of Maine found violates the United States Constitution and federal law? That's the question in front of us. I'm happy to jump in on it unless you'd like to go first.
Yeah, so the premise of this is that the Maine Constitution states that individuals that are under guardianship are not allowed to vote. And this is with the premise that if a citizen is not allowed to make a decision for themselves, if they have a guardian that is the person who is to make their decisions, that they cannot vote. This is the third time that this is coming up on our ballot. But what is unique this time from the first 2 times is that now this question has been taken to court. So do you want to address that a little bit?
You know, I don't know the real history of it. I know this went through the VLA committee, the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. And when it came to the floor of the Senate, I didn't know very much about it, but I voted no on it on the floor. I heard from my colleague from the other side of the aisle, Senator Hickman, who was not very happy with me voting no on that one.
I'm sure.
And I will say, Senator Hickman, he's a Democrat, but we've collaborated on many things. He's good on some liberty issues. But I guess for me, I think I'm gonna continue to be a no on this, though it's not a hill to die on. But for me, I get that we've had this ruling by a federal court. I get that they say that it violates the U.S. Constitution. Frankly, as a 10th Amendment states' rights kind of person, I mean, I would carry more weight with me if it was a state court that had ruled this and not the federal government telling us, what our laws need to be, just like they've done in the past with. I mean, there's so many ways that I think the federal government has come in and overruled the construction of our Constitution. And whether it has been, I mean, it used to be in the state of Maine, you had 2 senators per county, right? And then the federal government came in and said, you can't do that. It has to be proportional. So now all the Senate districts have gravitated towards southern Maine and population centers. It used to be that you couldn't be, that if you were just a college student who was just living in Maine part-time, you weren't necessarily qualified to vote because you were registered somewhere else. The federal government has overruled that. And I think that ultimately, I just don't like bending over backwards to just accommodate and do whatever the federal government tells us. And to the specifics of the policy of this particular question, whether someone who is under guardianship, so someone who is under guardianship for reasons of mental illness, should they be able to vote? I mean, I get that there's always this push. We want to expand the franchise of voting, and certainly in many cases I'm very much for that, but we're talking about someone who's been deemed basically not deemed to be an adult, or at least not treated like an adult. They're under guardianship. You know
what's different about this question, that's unique about this question than the other questions, though, is that because there's been a court ruling on this, those that are under guardianship actually do have the ability to vote now. So because of that court ruling, they can vote. What's the question here really, to me, is what is the appropriate answer to that as far as amending our Constitution? So the long and short is that because of that court ruling, it does need to be amended. I don't know if this is the right amendment for it, however. And so, the question that I thought that Maine Policy expressed really well is, what is that answer? If this is voted yes, then essentially anyone under a guardianship for reasons of mental illness, as I understand it, can vote, right? And that's what that court ruling has done. The question is, if this is voted down, then will we at some point see another referendum, another constitutional amendment that's more narrowly and appropriately tailored? And so rather than being so broad as under guardianship for mental illness, more narrowly tailored to the mental incapacity to vote. And so that to me is the real question here is because yes or no, those under guardianship will be able to vote because of the court case. So the question here is, where do we go if Maine people vote no? And I have not fully made up my mind on this one yet, but I think that I lean towards wanting to see a more narrowly tailored constitutional amendment rather than one that is so broad. Because if someone does not have the legal capacity to make a decision about their bank account or other decisions in their life, then should they have the ability to vote?
I think it really gets to, what does it mean to vote? I mean, ultimately, we're talking about voting is an act of participating in the wielding the power of the state. I mean, and the state is it's an institution. It's the monopoly on violence, right? It's very serious decisions that we're making, which is why I think most of us, when we hear proposals in other states, they want to like lower the voting age to like 16. It's like most people bristle at that. Like, no, this is an act that requires real consideration and real responsibility. And if you are not capable of exercising adult judgment in your own life,
right?
Why would we want to? I feel like it's like giving a loaded gun to someone
I don't want to see that suddenly we've got a bunch of guardians voting rather than the folks under the guardianship.
And that's
right.
That's a
and
concern
so
too.
I don't want to open up that box where we have people without mental capacity to vote having other people decide for them how they're voting.
Yeah.
And I think
a guardian like filling out the absentee ballot
you want
for
to
them.
Vote for this person, you want to vote for this person. So that one is, I don't know that we're going to give a hard and fast vote no, vote yes on this. But
all I'm going to say is what I'm going to do. People back home will make up their own minds.
Exactly. I don't know that there is an absolute right answer on this. I would personally like to see us probably vote this down and come up with a more narrowly, appropriately tailored amendment to the Constitution that does what it's intended to do.
All right. We're going to circle back now to question 5. Question 4. Question 4.
We got a question. Hang on. Dave, the producer, has a question for us.
So do we need to repeat the question so people can hear it?
Sure.
Oh. So I'm hoping you would do it.
Read it one more time, Dave.
You want to just read it loud?
Sure.
Isn't there something to be said for getting the Secretary of State out of the practice of selectively not enforcing Maine laws?
So isn't there something to be said about getting the Secretary of State out of the process of selectively not enforcing Maine laws?
Right.
Is that...
That's got to be in reference to... Was that typed in on the last question?
On the last question?
Or... Yeah, on the last question. I don't know that that's an issue of the Secretary of State kind of picking and choosing winners and losers there on question 8, because that's really out of their purview as far as if someone is voting under guardianship. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's an interesting question I haven't really thought through. Like, if you are the Secretary of State in this situation and you've got the federal court ruling on one side and you've got the state constitution on the other side, if this doesn't pass, well, I know what this Secretary of State does.
Sure.
But theoretically, could does a Secretary of State have some discretion in terms of deciding, am I going to follow state law or this federal court ruling?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, I think that's a good reason that this should be resolved at some point, whether it is resolved with this election or not, depending on if this referendum question passes or fails.
Yeah.
If it passes, then the question is resolved and it's really no longer in the Secretary of State's hands.
Or we could also just say, the federal courts have made their decision. Now it's up to them to enforce it.
Yeah, that's true. So I guess it comes down to if this referendum question, if question 8 passes in November, then it's kind of out of the Secretary of State's hands. And if not, then it does remain open to her discretion.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's a great reason why we need to win the conservative majority next year and elect a new Secretary of State.
One of many.
So we'll move on to question number 4. We're going backwards number-wise. So this question is the right to repair question. It is, do you want to require vehicle manufacturers to standardize onboard diagnostic systems and provide remote access to those systems and mechanical data to owners and independent repair facilities? All right. So Eric, do you want to put that in, everyday Maine or lay people language so we can all get a baseline?
Yeah. So we were talking about this before we started recording, because this is a this can be a difficult one to think about. So basically, this is called the right to repair bill referendum that'll be on the ballot. And basically, if you purchase a vehicle and you want to take it to an independent, an independent garage
rather than the dealership.
Yeah, rather than the dealership, should the company that manufactures the vehicle be required to have a standardized onboard diagnostic systems that make it accessible for these independent garages to run diagnostics and basically, should you have a right to take that to an independent shop and have access to all the information, that garage have access to all the information they would need to be able to repair that. And on the one hand, it's certainly, I like the idea of...
Yeah, on the surface, that sounds like a great idea to me.
Yeah, I own a vehicle. I bought it. I should be able to take it where I want. But it does also get a little bit more complicated. Some things I don't quite totally understand is when we're saying that we're going to require vehicle manufacturers to standardize onboard diagnostic systems. So
that's the first thing that gives me pause, Eric, is anytime I see the word require.
Yeah, we're requiring private businesses to do something.
Right. And so that's that first part. Do you want to require vehicle manufacturers to standardize their onboard diagnostic systems and then provide access? And so, I don't know that this is necessarily thought about as a property rights issue, but that's kind of how I'm seeing this question as property rights and the different entities that have property rights that we're talking about here. So let's talk about the manufacturer and where they're coming from. First of all.
Yeah, one of the concerns I've heard about this is that are we requiring private businesses to basically release and disclose proprietary information, and that seems problematic to me if we're requiring private businesses to release proprietary information that as part of their business model they keep within their system.
On the other side of that coin, though, you've got that an individual has bought the vehicle, right?
Yeah,
so you've got the individual has bought the vehicle, and if I want to take my Honda Odyssey into whomever to repair it and not to the dealership, should they have the same access to all the same information that the dealership has? And that's kind of what this is getting to.
Yeah, and it's in some ways it's helpful, I think, to even think of this if you think of like the world of computers, to step out
Yeah,
out
yeah.
of cars, because I'm not so much of a car guy. I mean, I know
Yeah.
I can look at a car's headlights and tell you exactly what direction it's going. That's my knowledge of cars there. But I think about like, in the computer world, like,
Mm,
just to think of it from a different angle. Like in the computer world, like there are a lot of different choices of things you can
mm-hmm,
purchase. You can purchase an Apple computer,
mm-hmm.
which if you want to get that thing repaired, you got to go to the Apple
Yeah.
store. Like that's the only place you can do. I mean, I suppose you could crack it open and mess with it, but like you're
Good luck.
good luck. Or you can get or you can like go out into the world of PCs and buy from a much more competitive field of things where you can basically go to any computer repair shop and they'll be able to figure that out for you. You can
Mm-hmm,
go total open source with Linux or things like that. And so for me, when I look at the question of cars, it's if this ability to be able to take your car anywhere and get it repaired, if that is something that consumers really want,
mm-hmm,
then why aren't we seeing more of that manifest naturally
mm-hmm,
in in a competitive marketplace for cars?
mm-hmm.
Why do we need a law to mandate that? If it's something that consumers want, businesses tend to provide things that consumers want because that's how they make money. Um, so if that's not happening, it seems to me one of two things. One, either consumers don't actually want it as much as we're being told that they do
Mm-hmm.
because they're not really demanding it, or two, our marketplace for car manufacturing is not as competitive as we might like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly do think that we are seeing a reduction in competition, over time within the car industry to some degree, largely because our federal government and various other states like California have put so many regulations in place that make it difficult to be a company that manufactures cars. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when's the last time, other than like Tesla,
Right.
when's the last time you heard of a new car manufacturer coming into the industry? So
Well, and then the state is look at Maine right now. We're facing the question of whether we should have electric vehicle mandates with rules
right,
127 and 128 possibly passing. And so, absolutely right. It's a case of the more the government gets involved with greater regulations and putting their hands into business, we see the diminished market and diminished choices for people. And so that's part of this question, isn't it? Is should there be, whether it's people voting on this referendum item, should there be any part of government having a say in what that market looks like? And so, on the one hand, we've got right to repair, and this requiring vehicle manufacturers to standardize their process, right? To standardize their diagnostic systems and make that available to owners and to the independent repair shops. What's interesting on this to me is that there's another piece that I don't know that it's been talked about that's in this law, and it's talking about actually civil remedy. So
mm,
if a manufacturer does not make their information available as they are supposed to, if this passes, then either the vehicle owner in that case or the repair shop can actually sue for damages up to $10,000, and that's really interesting to me because if we're talking about property rights, that independent repair shop actually does not have they don't own the vehicle,
mm,
right? And they haven't manufactured the vehicle. They haven't come up with the technology, and they haven't made this vehicle, but they, according to this, would have the right to sue the manufacturer that does have the right to the intellectual property if they do not share that. So that is a really interesting piece of right to repair that I think has not been talked about at all. Um, but for me, it does come down to property rights and whose property rights trump whose. And for me, I think I'm coming down on the side that that government should not be telling private business how to operate, and that we shouldn't be requiring vehicle manufacturers to standardize their technology. And so that is the question. So do we need government to intervene there, or can the free market actually intervene. If there is a manufacturer out there that will not allow any of their information out, they want to be the only ones to repair their vehicle. Let's say Honda. I'm an Odyssey owner. Let's say Honda says, "Nope, we're not going to give our information to anybody. Period. Full stop. We repair in our dealerships, or no one repairs." Well, you know what? If Toyota says, actually, we're going to give all of our information to the independent dealers and make sure that Toyota owners know how to repair their vehicles, I'm probably going to switch to Toyota, because it's going to be more convenient and more inexpensive to fix my Toyota than it is to fix my Honda. This is all very theoretical. Neither Toyota nor Honda have been harmed in the making of this live, but
Why are these all Japanese cars?
I don't know. Listen, they both seat 8, and we've got a big family.
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of, I'd rather see the free market sort this out, that if there are manufacturers who are making it onerous to get your vehicle fixed, well, hopefully folks aren't going to buy that car again.
Yeah.
And so
and just like there are people who swear by their Apple computers and won't buy anything else, if that's the kind of system you want to have, where you can only take it to the Apple store,
right,
like we're talking about with vehicles, where you could only take some of these to the licensed dealership, that's people's right as a consumer. If that's the product you want, you can get that. But again, the market can sort a lot of these things out. Markets follow what consumers want. And if that's not happening, usually it's because somewhere along the way, there's a government law blocking the dam, stopping...
putting their finger on the scale.
Right. And so if we want a vehicle marketplace that's more responsive to the wants and the needs of consumers, then we've got to push back against all of these regulations coming from the federal government and coming from California. California passes them for their state, and because there's such big market share, these things tend to unroll across the whole country, like we're seeing right now, as our own state is considering following California's lead in terms of mandating electric cars. So not to go down a whole other rabbit hole there, we could be talking for a lot longer. But so let's repeal the laws that restrict competition.
Absolutely.
Rather than putting more mandates on business, telling them how they need to offer services to their customers.
Absolutely. And this is, I would say, somewhat similar to the other questions, in that I would go out on a limb and say I probably have family and friends that are going to vote yes on this, and I have family and friends that are going to vote no on this.
I have friends who were getting signatures for this, so
absolutely. This is not one that right to repair is not a moral issue. It's not an issue that is really. There are people who are going to have very strong feelings on it. So if you talk to your mechanic versus, a manufacturer, you're going to hear very different things. This is our take on it. But I'd love to hear in the questions if folks have any thoughts that they'd like to share. Dave, do we have anything that's popping up in the comments that we should bring up? No, we do not.
All right.
Well, I hope we've answered everybody's questions here tonight, and that this has been helpful. Of course, we do have next week on Wednesday, October 18th, 2 more questions. That's going to be questions 1 and 2 at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, October 18th. And then the big one that everyone is asking about. I don't know if you've gotten most of your questions about this. Pine Tree Power. That is question number 3. And that we're going to be discussing on Monday, October 23rd at 7 p.m. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you are around for that live, and share this video with anyone who may not have been on tonight. It will be up on my page so folks can tune in and hear Sunder Brakey's and my take on the referendum questions. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.